So welcome to Kevin Langkiet's dissertation. I will leave him to introduce his committee members, but I want to give you an overview of how this is going to work. So we'll start out, and Kevin will present the work he's done, and I'll ask people to hold their questions till the end. We'll open it up for questions from the committee members and from the audience. After we've wrapped up that question-and-answer session, I'll excuse the audience, ask committee members to stay. Committee will have a discussion. I'll bring Kevin back in, and then you guys can come back in. Okay? So Kevin, take it away.
Good morning. Introduction of the committee?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll start over here. This is my friend, my first that I watched. This is Jialin. She is my informatics liaison, the person that I really look for, and she's questioned a few things, so we really like that. She was the first one I actually got to watch at this end, so it was great. It was awesome. It was very nice. Thank you for all your help, Dr. Barbara Wilson. So really fantastic, looking at systems, looking at how things happen, and pulling things together. So this dissertation that you're going to see, this investigation, all stems around that investigation of pulling multiple disciplines together and putting them into one system. So that's the part that we really wanted to focus on and get that together. So thank you very much. Bob Long. What more needs to be said? Statistician galore, always questions why, great inspirations in trying to figure out what needs to be done and how can we look at it differently. Also has, he and Dr. Cummings have a special interest, as well as Dr. Sport, the Delphi study, and that's the method that I use, so thank you for that. And then last but not least, well, I've got another one. I'm sorry, I keep forgetting you're not in the room, Annie. Annie Wilson is a PhD. She also comes with organizational development background. I have worked with her. She's actually been a co-worker employee at the same organization I have worked at. And it's been nice because part of the interest in this Delphi investigation has to do with project manager and organizational development, getting change agents. So she has been a great lead on that piece and helping me move through the different areas of that. So thank you, Annie. Plus, she's also been my confidant, my sounding board, my crying moments, my shoulder to cry on and stuff. So that's been great. She has moved, so she literally has divorced me. She's in Colorado now, so that was a hard time. And then last but not least, the person that has given me the inspiration to keep moving forward, keeps me going, keeps me aligned, and last but not least, it makes me keep moving so that I get through this program. This has been a long program that I've worked on just because personal life changes, moving across the country. So Dr. Kathy Sword has been the chair and been the one that's been keeping me on track and keeping me grounded. So thank you guys. All right, so I'm going to get started. Before I get the very first slide, I want to ask a question of everybody. Simple question. Imagine, if you will, you're the CEO of a hospital. And during that tenure of your time there, your information technology is about to roll out in innovation. And how does that make you feel? That information technology, IT, whatever that innovation is, imagine the resources that you're going to use and how that's going to go through and go forward. That's the crux of what's hitting healthcare now today. Multiple hospitals across the country are living through this, and they're trying to see how things are going. They want to know the CEO's viewpoint, the CIO, anybody in the C-suite. Is everything going to roll out the way it should? Is my investment worth it? Is it safe? We're taking care of live human beings. Is it safe for our patients? Is my return on investment going to be worth it? So a study was actually done in 2009 from Kathleen Harris and Solomon. It said that 50% actually failed across the nation. So here's 50% of all the innovations that are actually being rolled out in a hospital are failing. Imagine, if you will, you go out and you buy a car. Either the car works or the car doesn't. Imagine how you'd feel. 50%. Is that what you want? As a CEO, is 50% acceptable? Imagine getting on an airplane. Half the airplanes will land successful, half do not. Imagine taking care of a patient. Half your patients are taken care of safely, half are not. Imagine how that feels. Think about it. So that's the whole thing around my dissertation and what I'm looking at. So the first aim of this is looking at and saying, Who is the best resource if we're going to implement information technology innovation at the bedside? If we're in a hospital, who is the one that's going to be the king person of all the resources that they have at their disposal? It's going to be the acute care nurse manager. They're the ones that actually oversee the care of the patient. They make sure that the frontline staff have the tools and resources available, whether that frontline staff is a nurse, a nursing assistant, a physician, a provider of sorts. What we want to do is make sure that those nurse managers actually have the skill set that they need to implement a change. So looking at this and saying, what are the specific competencies of an acute care nurse manager who functions in the role of a change agent implementing an IT innovation? That's what the first aim of this whole investigation was at. The second one actually focused on a little bit more. We wanted to go in a little bit more depth, not just the core competencies, but how do you measure those competencies? How do you actually can adjust the expectations of an acute care nurse manager? Are they able to do that job? Are they able to be successful with that core competency? If that core competency is a novice, if you will, they're not as successful as an expert, and that was the big piece. Wanted to make sure we get them up as high as we could and figure out where they sit in that level, that continuum of expertise, whether they're a novice, an advanced beginner, a competent proficient, or expert. So we wanted to look at that. So that's aim number 2 in this study. So we wanted to go through and get all that together and figure out what happens. So we focused on some theories. There's so many different nursing theories, there's so many different change theories that we wanted to bring into the study to say which one is the best one. Well, of course, there's always Lewin's change theory, which starts off, and then it keeps building after that. What we really wanted and what I wanted to focus on is the acute care nurse manager. So looking at that specific nursing theory, what is it I can get out of it? And there were so many that we had to go through that we couldn't find that spoke to the acute care nurse manager implementing IT innovation. Yeah, I could do diffusion, I could find other ITs, but it doesn't talk to the role of the acute care nurse manager. It wasn't until we actually found the middle manager's role in the healthcare. It's really looking at the middle manager in this healthcare innovation of IT. So how do they implement it? And so what do they need to have? How do they go through it? So Burton, Lee, and Wagner actually came up with this theory and worked it through, got a conceptual model that you'll see, and put it all together into writing, which was really nice. Because as an acute care nurse manager, I could look at this and say, okay, these are the things I need to work on. The very first one, implement the policies and the practice. That's basically my job as an acute care nurse manager. But this has to do with the implementation of an innovation. So I have to focus on that. Obtaining and diffusion of information, still going back and making sure I can get that information going forward to the frontline users of that IT innovation. The second one, adapting the information and the innovation so that it becomes habit, it becomes rote. And how do they do that? Then it was mediating between the strategy of the implementation of the new innovation, as well as the day-to-day activities, patient care, what needs to go on, staffing that needs to happen for the acute care nurse manager. What does that look like? How does it happen? And then the bottom one is actually selling the innovation to implementation. So getting the frontline staff to buy in, actually create some buy-in to that innovation and put it in place, which all leads to the implementation climate. What is it like on that nursing unit to get that innovation accepted? So all of this played together, and this actually was the best conceptual model that works for acute care nurse manager with the implementation of IT innovation. So I put all this together and said, okay, how do you do this? If you came back and you'd walk to the acute care nurse manager and say, how do you implement the policies and practice? Well, I just do it. I make it happen. Well, how do you do that? So we started thinking about this and started looking at it. And actually what was really nice is talking to Dr. Lee, who's part of the team that built this, is how do you measure people are successful with this? And that was the piece that we couldn't figure out, is how do you figure out, how am I successful? Well, we get an annual evaluation as acute care nurse manager. That tells us how we're successful. But still, we want to go back to that original question. If you're the CEO and 50% fail annually, what do you do to do? So you want to make sure that you have better success. So we started looking at different things and saying, okay, we need change agents. We've got to figure out how to train these acute care nurse managers into change agents. So we looked at other industries. So the business and the manufacturing industries, been around for a long time. They have change agents. They've actually defined the competencies. They've actually used theories. They put it into practice. And they actually have an education program built on it. There's national certifications within these industries to do such a thing, to become those change agents. And so it was nice to look at them and say, can we take what they have built, what they have put in place, and can we move that into the role of acute care nurse manager? Does that make sense? And so that was the whole gist of the project that we're working on, and the investigation that we completed, was saying, as a change agent within the business and the manufacturing, those core competencies, are they the same for the nurse, the acute care nurse manager? And saying, can we do that? Can we look at it? So we go back to the original concept model, and we look at it and say, okay, here are the things that we could not measure. The last one, yes, that's success, that's measurement. We have our outcomes, we know what that is. The rest of them, the 6, we could not actually truly identify. They were having issues with it, and so we were sitting there trying to figure out how to do this, and we said, let's focus on something. Let's go back to the core competencies within business and say, can we figure out, of those core competencies, business, manufacturing, are they the same, and how do they fit into there? And that's where it was really kind of neat, because we went back and said, aim number 1 is what we need. So, implemented the Delphi. So what is a Delphi? Just to give a little background on a Delphi, it's really kind of a unique investigation. It's not qualitative, it's not quantitative. It comes with its own little innuendos of how do you do it and what is the psychometrics that happen with it. What you normally do in a traditional Delphi, it's been around since 1950s, RAND organization started them first. They've been going through different variations through the years. But what's nice about it is you bring a panel of experts. It's how you define experts. There are definitions out there, but you bring the experts together. They're not meeting face-to-face in the traditional method. What they actually do is they have some, they're anonymous to each other. They know that people are out there. They just don't know exactly who's participating. They're asked an open-ended question. What is the core competencies of a nurse manager? So we went through that. I didn't do this traditional. I tried to modify it a little bit, and I'll show you what that looks like. But in a traditional Delphi, they are given an open-ended question. They respond. That information comes back, and then they get to see that information, and they decide if they want to keep it or do they want to alter their submissions the first round. And so it goes in subsequent rounds. It's an interview process in which people gain a consensus at some point. It can be many rounds, it can be 1 or 2 rounds, it can go up to 4 or 5. Your panel of experts doesn't have a limitation. It can be just a few people, it can be a moderate-sized group, moderate being under 100, or you can actually have a large group, which would be very difficult to manage, but that's what you could do. And you keep doing it until you get to an outcome that everybody's in agreement. That's the hard part about a traditional Delphi. What I actually did was actually a modified Delphi technique. So the first thing was, I don't come in and ask an open-ended question. I would not ask the group, a panel, and say, what is the core competencies? What I did is I gleaned from the business and manufacturing and put it together and said, here's what they say are the core competencies of a change agent. Is that appropriate for the acute care nurse manager that's implementing an IT innovation? So we started with what we knew, and that was the biggest piece. So we started it, we gave it out, we had a panel of experts that we actually talked to. There were 3 different groupings that we put in here. That we had nurse managers, we had nursing directors, and we had nurse executives. So that was the one group. So we wanted the acute care supervision as well as the manager that's in that role. We wanted them to be part of the study. They had to have experience of at least 2 years in their current position, and they had to have at least some time of graduate education. Nursing informaticists was the next one, because we're working with IT innovation. We needed that IT background. So we brought in some nursing informaticists into this study and said, you know, you're an expert, you've been there for 2 years, you've worked in a hospital as well as IT for that 2 years in that role, and so we wanted your information, and you've had experience with that. The last one was the kind of the unique one, and that was bringing in both project manager and organizational development together, because they are the ones. Within project management, they have national certifications for certain things, such as a project manager, which is a change agent per se, but they don't have the theories. Where organizational development is just the opposite. It has all the theories, but it doesn't have the certifications. So what I said in this one is I take these individuals that have 2 years of acute care experience working in the role of a project manager or organizational development. So we brought all these people together. We started off with 36 individuals. They went through the whole program. We ended up with 25 at the end, but we had a good group, a very large group per se, of the individuals that helped us come to these final decisions. So we brought all these things together. They did not talk to each other. It was not face-to-face. We did not want to interject bias because some of these nursing executives may be well-known or some of the informaticists may be popular with other people. I didn't want them to meet with each other. It was all done through a platform that they went in and submitted. So there was no face-to-face, there was no talking, there wasn't any of those variables into the study. They were each given, on the first aim, they were each given a Likert score, 5 points, that they could actually go through and say, are these the core competencies, and are these what those core competencies stand for? I'll use communication as an example. So here's communication as a core competency, and under that there were multiple different indicators. Did one of those indicators may happen to be have two-way communication? Was that appropriate for an acute care nurse manager? So as we went through this, they said on a 5-point scale, yes, no, it was absolutely, I agree, no, I strongly disagree, and all that in the middle. So that was a nice piece. We actually set the acceptance score to 80%. So that we could say, before we send it out, that people, if it didn't generate at least 80%, there's something wrong with it, let's pull it back. The ones that hit 80%, let's make sure it's working, and that's where it needs to go, and it stays with that core competency. And that actually was a very good number. I was very happy with that number at the time. And then once we started doing it, it actually showed that it was really pretty relevant. So we did the first round, and we actually came back. The core competencies were actually very good. We had a little issue with one. If you go through and you see these, the coaching, communication, critical thinking were actually very clear-cut. There was a couple of questions that came out of it. Flexibility, leadership, negotiation was very spot on. The risk and quality control became a question during the first round. The indicators below that said this is what risk control or this is what quality control was did not have sufficient depth. And so what we put back is, we came back and said, what if we mirror the two together, just like hospitals are doing, where risk and quality are together. We put those two together, we merge them. And so that worked out, and I'll show you that in the second round, how that happened. Schedule and cost control were always together. That's actually together in the other industry, so we kept those two together in this one. But what was nice was when we went through the round one, we actually saw all of these. The core competencies were completely spot on. And like I said, the groupings were changed a little bit, so we established all of that. So we made sure that everything stayed throughout. As we did the second round, it was still, here's the core competency, and here's all the indicators below it. So that was the best part. So aim number one was actually met with this first round, which was very successful, much more successful than I expected. Aim number two, we wanted to stratify, and so we had to pick some way to label these individuals and say, okay, are you a beginner? Are you at a stage one, a stage two? So the easiest way to go back is just find Brenners and use the novice to expert and put those labels in there so that people would be able, the expert panels could actually identify where they would be during that. And it was kind of nice because as we went through and started working with this, some comments were made. There was agreement in the actual rounds and the submissions, but there were comments made that made us stop and pause. And I really had to think about a couple of them because the comments were very, very good on the novice. So we actually did that. Aim two, we put them all into place, and we actually said, here is a novice under communication, a novice under coaching, critical thinking, and all the way through. And this is the indicator of what you would normally see as an acute care nurse manager working through that. So the panel on the round two actually hit 100%. They were actually in total agreement through all of it. They had agreement in their submissions, but they did have comments. And one of the unique comments that came through from several of the individuals was the indicator for novice often included had skills and knowledge to implement. And the comments that came out of the group was maybe not a novice has all that information. They may have the information, may not have mastered the skill, or they have the skill but they don't know why they're doing it. So they requested that we pull that have the skill and knowledge but able to. And so we changed that piece. The nice thing about this, the Chromebox Alpha, all the way through these that stuck in were 0.999. I mean, you couldn't get much closer to 1 if you just did it. I'm sorry, I don't know what the N stands for. I just now see that. But that was a nice piece about that is we had total agreement from the entire panel, the 25 that ended up going through this. And again, the comment section was the one that talked about the novice ranking, and so that was a unique piece. So under coaching, I'm going to kind of go through these a little fast. Coaching, we actually worked these out, so the novice was the networking, maintaining contacts within and outside of their area. So a nurse manager, if she was a novice in coaching, then she would actually reach out to other individuals outside of her nursing unit and maintain those contacts. Advanced beginner still building their teams, utilizing those teams as members as being a competent coach, and then gaining commitment. That was really the big one. Gaining commitment into doing the teamwork, doing the innovation, doing the project made you more proficient. And then the expert was actually everybody working together, using the strengths and weaknesses of the team that they have built so that they gain what they needed to. Those are the different indicators the panel actually agreed to. Communication, again, the novice was personal enthusiasm. There's an asterisk at the end of this because that is one of those that they said the novice may be able to not have skill and knowledge of. So it was just that little piece. Advanced beginners, again, motivate with just words, not being threatening, but just saying this will be for the good or the better. Competent was the two-way communication, as well as explaining the expectations and the goal of the innovation implementation. So that was what they focused on that. The proficient is actually getting the buy-in, create the buy-in with the individual frontline. And then last, the expert is lead with conviction. It's putting everything into place so that we're pushing the individuals, frontlines, to accept the new innovation. We're creating the buy-in, and we're setting the goals and expectations. Third one, critical thinking. They seek alternative pathways. Again, the asterisk just the notes that we had. Comments on that one. The advanced beginner, develop alternative plans. A little bit different than the first one. First one is looking for, but the second one, which is the advanced beginner, is able to start saying, okay, let's do this if this happens. The competent one is differing levels of acceptance. Understanding that we don't have to be perfect every time. It was a little difficult on this. We had to go back to a few individuals and actually question, what did that mean to you? And they were actually saying, I don't have to be perfect. I have to get 80%. I have to get 70%. I have to get it moved through the end of the shift. That's their understanding of what that was about. Alternative disciplines. This is a proficient. Goes out and looks outside. What does the physical therapist, how do they accomplish this? What does respiratory? Those kind of things. What is the pharmacist? And then the expert is mitigate the key issues or the barriers that were actually encountered throughout the program or the implementation that they were working on. This one was a little fun, flexibility, because it was little word that were changes that we had issues with. So the first one, again, had the comments, but it's different methods, same results. I can get from here to there, but I go through. Instead of doing A to B, I had to do A to C and then get to B. Simple changes was the advanced beginner, accepting of simple changes. We're not going to meet at 10 o'clock, we're going to meet at 11 o'clock. We have to do it with this piece of paper, we use this form. The competent was changes without delays in the program itself. So whatever the new thing that actually came about, as long as it didn't cause any delays, they were good with it. Proficient is those changes that actually changed the project. I'm sorry, without changing the project. Going through major key player changes, what was happening, things got rearranged. Who moved my cheese is a perfect example of this proficient. So that's the manager in that part. And then changes for the expert is those that don't cause stress to your team. Now, there was an earlier one on the competent is stress for themselves. This one is the stress for your team, making sure that your team doesn't understand that you're hitting a brick wall and it's going to hurt and we got to get through it. So that's the piece they were really pushing on that piece. Leadership. This was kind of unique because we had to go through this and a couple of times I had to ask people to make sure that I was understanding what they were saying. Clear picture. This is what the program is, this is what the implementation, this is what we've got to get in place. The advanced beginner, again, active listening, positive relationships, dealing those people together so that you can have them as a team. Building trust with follow-through for the competent. So that was a huge piece that we had to actually think about that comes out of the business industry is how do you build the teams? We can put people to work together. It doesn't mean they actually like each other or they're willing to be a team member, but if you put people together, how do they augment each other? That's the big one. Proficiency, again, looking at resiliency, how does it bounce back? You hit a barrier, how do you deal with it? How do you move through it? How does leadership stand out front so that they keep everything moving? And building those lasting relationships. Even after the implementation is in place, as we all know, we still have to go back and touch base with those individuals. Again, that's what this is talking about. And the expert for this one is actually all of everything above And it includes delegates appropriately. So acute care nurse manager who delegates to staff members to help do different functions and gives them authority to actually make decisions. That was a big piece of this, is say, okay, I need you to go to this meeting, I need you to stand in or actually take ownership, and you actually can make decisions. This is the expert leader who actually can delegate that responsibility away. Negotiations, again, appreciates other position opinions. I can sit down as a novice manager and say, you know, I understand you all have your own opinion of something. This is what we've got to do. So defining the acceptable limits for the advanced beginner, again, we've got to get through the project, we've got to get the implementation in place. Competent is somebody who can actually design an outcome that's a win-win for all of us, and looking at it and making sure that we're moving forward and getting what needs to happen. Proficient, biggest piece of this is everything above, but we don't have power confrontations. So I may be the manager, I may be the director, but you're still going to have to do what I tell you. It's avoiding those situations. This is what's best for the patient. This is what's best for the organization. This is actually what's best for you. And then the last one for the expert is all of that, but must be done consistently. Has to be done on a routine basis. It's regular habit for them to do these things. So that was the one thing. All the others before, the indicators actually lead off with has skills and knowledge, where this one says must consistently demonstrate. So that's where it stood out for this. Risk and quality, after we merged these together, this is what they came up with. The novice is to identify areas of potential resistance, just identifying where they may hit the brick wall. The advanced beginner, maintaining compliance. Compliance with whatever the program has actually put in place, that you have to do what you have to do. Competent, advocating for recommendations. So if somebody that's looking for other alternative ways also wants to mitigate their risk and improve their quality, they ask their frontline people for recommendations. What's better? Proficient, again, complex mitigation planning, really complex. This is a large project overall and looking at it. And again, the last one on this one, an expert is putting them all together, but include the word consistency. Must consistently portray, demonstrate, do, act, say. It's all of those. So that was a big piece. Again, the ones before were actually skills and knowledge, but this one is now consistency. Schedule and cost, again, going back to the business and manufacturing and looking at what they had. Common goals or measures, again, looking at what they can do. They set these. A novice manager in the schedule and cost control area sets very simple measures. This is the goal. We're going to accomplish this. The shift will end, whatever that will be. Advanced beginner, establishing simple timelines, not complex timelines. These are very simple. We're going to do this by tomorrow. The next meeting will be this. The competent then goes into the complex timelines and actually includes budgets. So if we're going to sit down and put a very large program in place, an innovation in IT, and put it out there, then we're going to have to put different pieces in place. When does the education happen? When did the computer infrastructure, when is it purchased? When is it installed? Those kind of timelines and what they're talking about. Proficient is completing the project and actually getting everything done despite all the barriers they had to go through. Shipping didn't get done, implementation didn't get hit because of education wasn't done, but yet we got the project running the way it was supposed to. Expert is the mitigation and timeline adjustments. So going through and changing things as we go through, because things did not hit well, but we still hit our deliverable date of when is the project going to be done. So the outcomes, what we came out of AIM 2, some of the indicators failed to hit the 80%. I already talked about those. So there were several of those. I'll go through those in just a minute, just to see what happened with those. We actually sat down and looked at them. So informatics and nurse management looked and said, why did these fail? What happened with them? And the rest of them, there was 100% agreement. So it was really kind of a standout. So the first one, actually, if you group them together, it was more upper management. It wasn't the acute care nurse manager's responsibility. So translate organizational vision into the project vision. That's really outside the scope of the acute care nurse manager. The percentages out to the side is what their acceptance levels were. So you can see some of them were way off, some were close, but again, they didn't hit the 80, so we kept them out. The lead negotiator for the major issues, again, the acute care nurse may not always be in there. That's why I scored a little bit higher. Political awareness and coalitions, again, as the role of the acute care nurse, actually finding coalitions and building the coalitions isn't their responsibility. And then the surface resistance and achieve acceptance. Still close, but did not hit the mark. The next one was the systems issues. really looking at it and saying, this is not an acute care nurse manager role. Looking at the use of resources. What does IT have? What are they bringing in? What is it you need? You can see 50%. And changes in key personnel, management structure, delivery of everybody, so it's not acute care nurse's job or responsibility to think of other people outside their department. That's what this is. So we said that's not really into it. Not an acute care setting. So if it's not applying to the acute care setting, it really doesn't apply to the nurse manager. Venture into unknown territories. We take care of patients every day. Our territory is known. We know what our building looks like. We know what our goals are to take care of our patients and to do our work. Functioning in uncertain environments, again, still outside. It's not going to change. Worst case scenario, if IT ever fails, what do? We go to paper. So we don't change. So it's not an unknown territory per se. Not appropriate characteristics. These two are kind of a little difficult. Really not easy to measure so much. Creative instincts, you don't have to be creative if you can handle all the other ones. And the other one is identify non-traditional methods or actions. So again, kind of getting close, but not quite appropriate for what we were doing and what's happening in the real world today of an acute care nurse manager. So going back to the concept model and putting all the pieces back together. Here's the merging of all the different disciplines and putting it back together. So again, going back to Berkeley and Wagner and saying, okay, what is it? How do you measure it? Well, we can't really do that. So we have now got all this information that we pulled from this little Delphi study, and we want to put it back into this. So the first thing we change is the implementation of policies and procedures, or practice, and we change it to leadership. That's truly those measures. Now we have a core competency, leadership, and we have indicators. We've actually scored it from novice to expert, so we can actually do a self-assessment of that. Obtaining and diffusion of information becomes communication, which we went through, and we've actually built that through this process. Adapting information and the innovation is actually critical thinking and flexibility. If you took what they said, they, Berkeley and Wagner, and said, what is that of implementation, it actually matches all of these. So this matches it perfectly. Mediating between strategy and day-to-day work activities is really kind of a difficult piece that we wanted to look at, but what was really good was it actually matched the risk and quality and some of the cost controls that were in there. Scheduling was in there with the timelines, but this actually matched, of all of these, this matched the best, I actually thought. The risk and quality was getting into the day-to-day. How good are you taking care of your patients? How well are you implementing? How much of the timeline? How much is your turnaround time? Your IT innovation, how is it helping? And that's the pieces that we're looking at. Selling innovation and implementation, again, is coaching. How do you implement your team? How do you raise your team and getting the team together? And then the implementation of the climate is really negotiation. How do you get your staff to do what they need to do so that we can accept this new innovation, we can put it into practice, and we have the results that we are looking for. So again, going back and taking this entire concept that was coming out of the middle manager's role in healthcare leadership implementation of an IT, now we have merged this back together and put the business in risk that now is the acute care nurse managers, and we said that's the piece that needed to happen. So now we have brought out through this Delphi, 25 people, experts have come up and said these are the core competencies, this is how you go through and score them, and this now leads to the final outcome, which is your implementation effectiveness, to say it was good. So what happens now? Part of this actually was build a assessment tool, if you will, a self-assessment. I, as an acute care nurse manager, I sat down and I go through and I take a self-assessment test using those core competencies, those 5 levels, novice to expert, and I rate myself, how well do I do these things on a normal basis. Then I can actually, from that, would be nice, I could actually say, oh, here's an acute care manager who's very strong in these areas. Here's an acute care nurse manager who has potential or opportunities to improve in these other areas. So what happens? Do I partner the two together? Do I complement each other? Hopefully the one who's weaker in something and stronger in the other can teach each other. Or can I take that same self-assessment tool and take an education plan that puts everything back into place? So I teach somebody proper communication, how to do negotiations, how to be flexible, how to build timelines. So we can actually now start coming back. So the piece of this is coming back and saying, how do you start defining what an acute care nurse manager looks like, who's implementing change, and what does that go? goes back to my original question that I asked. So imagine, if you will, you're the CEO. You're about to implement. You know 50% of the time it's going to fail, an IT innovation being rolled out in your hospital. Where do you want to spend your money? Do you want to roll the dice and get 50-50? Or do you want to hedge your bet, spend some money, spend some time, spend some resources, educate your acute care nurse managers so that your implementation project actually gets off the ground, has a higher rate of success by making your managers more aware and more confident in what they're doing? Questions for my committee?
So I'll open it up for questions. You want to start with committee members? Annie, do you have anything you want to start us out, or?
I don't have any questions top of mind. I think you did a great job, Kevin, and you might have seen me being excited when you're showing the last model changing into your competencies. I thought that was a great presentation.
Thank you.
So Joanne, I know you have one.
Stable.
All right, atta girl.
Okay, so that stuff was the mapping thing. I'm very interested about, you propose, you have theoretical framework, right? And you developed the instrument and you found out some construct can represent something, just represent one of the elements in the theoretical framework. So how do you do this mapping?
When the three original writers of the concept, the nursing theory, and then into the concept model, they actually wrote out what each one of those levels look like, or one of those boxes, if you will, contain. It wasn't written out to a point that you can go up to a nurse manager and say, how do you do this? How is this measured? Well, that's what I do day to day. You know, it's like breathing. How do you do that? Well, do you want me to tell how the muscles work, or negative pressure, positive pressure, or it just happens? So theirs was very fluid and very difficult to pin down. Once we went back and I actually got the results from the second round, it was easier to match because they had told me, the expert panels had said, this is your level of expertise, and these are the different indicators. And these actually matched in those definitions of those activities.
So
versus,
for example, climate, you map with negotiation, and how this connects to each other.
In theirs, they were talking about how do you relate to your staff and you get your staff to do things.
Yeah.
And then when we went through it, we actually said, the expert panel came back and said, getting your staff to do things with a win-win without using authority, and so they kind of started weaving together, and it matched more. That's why I said the risk and quality and the schedule and cost, they are actually almost word for word matching.
Yeah.
That was kind of nice. That was the only one that actually did. Leadership was another difficult one because they were talking about how do you implement the practice, how do you implement policies. Well, theirs was you are the head, you are the lead, you are the manager, you will go out, you do this, and this is what you say. Well, okay, but he had to drop back and say, that doesn't make sense because I also have a housekeeper that goes out and says things and does things and makes things happen. It doesn't mean they are the lead of that. As we started weaving these back through, the core competencies and their indicators were starting to match into their groupings much better. And it actually, they want this stuff so that they can actually define theirs a little bit better and put their groupings a little bit more tight, if you will, very detailed, where theirs were very fluid. That's the only way I can describe it, because it was kind of a wishy-washy, hard to get them all in separate groups. I have to admit, I had a hard time reading through 6 separate groups and trying to make sure they were all very different.
Yeah.
Where this, for the results from the panel, was very different. It was very separate.
Good. So for your DFI study, you have a 5 Likert scale. I'm wondering why you choose 5 Likert scale instead of 4? Because if we have 4, we kind of enforce them, the no middle answer. They have to go slightly to 3 and 3. But why you use 5?
Yeah. It's just merely that's what we went with. I absolutely always and absolutely never's never happened. We didn't get any. Everything was. I don't think you even got it. I got some 3s. Most of them were 4s and 5s. I mean, it was very lopsided. I just went with the 5 points.
I see. And I'm very interested about the visibility question as well. So I see your proposal, you plan out the concurrent visibility thing, and so tell us about I'm not going to discuss here. So tell me about your plans to do the concurrent visibility.
That's looking more at a tool. This is one Delphi, 36 individuals started off, 25 finished it. So going concurrent, it's not really, this is the Delphi study versus looking at what's out there in business and manufacturing. So it's not really pulling the two together. Now, if I went ahead with the assessment tool, then I would start doing more concurrent validity testing and saying, is this tool doing what I need to do, and is it measuring and is it being successful in predicting what's happening? That we've played with the tool, and I've gone through and I've used it. I've actually given it to 6 of my managers and said, this is pretty spot on. So, but doing the Delphi study is only with these individuals.
The reason I was asking that question because concurrent validity usually compare our instrument with something developed already. And since yours is so new, how we can find another one?
It'd probably be the same way exactly how I did it, was do it on some individuals, and then go to the supervisor and say, this person says they're an expert at communication, and this is what the definition of an expert. Would you agree that this person is? That may be one way. It's very hard to go out and say, this is the very first tool we've ever got. How do we compare this to something else?
Have you thought about doing maybe something we call a conversion validity, things which we can compare our tool we developed with something we know relevant to this outcome, the tool. So
that's program study versus dissertation.
Yes.
But yes, I totally agree.
Great.
Thank you.
Can we go back to, how about the original concept model, the middle manager's role in health organization? Yeah. So and there's not a right or wrong answer to this. I'm wondering what your sense is. So when I looked at this, I thought, okay, so you have those 4 mediators that affect the relationship between implementation and the climate. But I noticed that in your model that none of the mediators, there weren't arrows from those mediators. And I found that really interesting because I do think, what's your take on that?
I think that's where this model, because it's so fluid of what they indicate, those groupings, how they actually came up with it. I'm going to use the first one, obtaining the diffusion of information. I'm like, okay, that sounds great. That's communication. How did you get your information out? Well, you have to get the information out. They could not say anything. And I'm like, but if I was an expert in that and I wasn't, I was a novice in this, would that affect this? It would, but could it affect each other? So if I communicate well, but what is going to be my risk and quality in the middle, does that mean that I could affect that? And that wasn't part of what they were looking at. They were just saying, well, no, these are independent of each other. And I'm like, I don't think that's true, because I can influence one of the others of these the same way, going horizontal versus, going vertical versus horizontal. And so, yeah, I agree that their model actually shows that it stands out that they do not relate to each other.
Because in your revised model, certainly communication is going to run vertical. But I have the same question you did. In fact, I put negotiation in a question mark by climate because the rest kind of made a lot of sense to me. But when I think of those 4 things mediating the relationship, that's where it was like, that didn't fit quite as well for me. But
I will say, it's only because of what the panel came out with, their indicators, it matched what they described as what the climate was. It's more of how do I, as an acute care nurse manager, how do I walk up to 7 nurses and say, you should, you have to, you've got to. And what came out of the Delphi, the modified Delphi, was related to their grouping of those actions the best. It was close to the leadership, the other side, but then it became nice that I could say, oh, they do affect each other, going this way, because they are horizontal, but not vertical.
Yeah. I would almost see coaching and negotiation being together and then still have climate as a separate, because when I think of climate, negotiation isn't quite it. I mean, to me, that's part of being an effective coach is, you know, you have the ability to negotiate anyway.
Well, if I could,
Yeah.
I would rearrange it completely and put leadership in the middle and put all of them going in and out to each other and around. So that way they're all related, that leadership is dead center. Because of what both the Delphi and what they came up with as leadership qualities, what leadership functions is dead center. It doesn't mean it has to start there and then everything follows after that.
Yeah.
So I would completely rearrange it.
Yeah, interesting. And then another question. So I was looking at your demographic table. By the way, great job.
Thank you.
And I noticed you had 7 project managers originally, but the 2 that never responded were ones that were from the healthcare industry. So they were all of the project managers were based in an acute care hospital.
They're all based in a hospital. The true people that were involved, yes, you are correct.
Yeah. Do you think, I mean, I was just curious. I thought, doggone it, that would have been interesting to see if their perception was different because they work in kind of a broader.
One of them just didn't respond, and then the other one was actually, when we were going through the Delphi and doing the submissions, they were actually on leave of absence. And so I didn't have the personal email, I was doing it through their work email.
Yeah.
And so that I did follow back to find out this.
And then my, another question, again, related to systems, is, were all of these nursing directors and informaticists from acute care hospitals, were they all from the same hospital, the same system? Did you look at hospital characteristics as possibly a mediator of any of that?
Tried to. All of them acute care settings all across the United States.
Okay.
So it wasn't any one given place. There was university hospitals, there were private hospitals, there were for-profit hospitals, there were 2 HMOs. Most of the facilities were greater than 200 beds. Only one person came from a hospital less than 200 beds.
I mean, just curiosity. I wondered if hospital characteristics at all would change your demographics. But yeah. So those were my questions. That was great. Thank you.
Lynn, Molly, either of you have anything you want to? Actually, I have several questions. Charlie has already. I'd like to know what's distinctive about these competencies compared to just generic change management or management in general.
Basically, I can say that there's not a lot of differences. Having been project manager in business, it's pretty much the same. The issue was, how does it relate to acute care nurse manager? There were, like I said, the few fell out because of the vision of the organization and stuff. The way that the acute care nurse manager implements it into practice will be the biggest piece, where it was talking about two-way communication, under communication, open-ended, following through, building relationships. That's the same wherever you go. But we could not find core competencies within the acute care nurse role that spoke to change with IT. And that was the biggest piece we wanted to focus on. So if we're going to roll out some kind of IT innovation of some sort, EHR or anything, really wanted to make sure that the acute care nurse manager had the right competencies. They had communication. What did that look like? There could be anything in acute care nurse manager role. It could be communication with providers. It can be, how do they do an annual evaluation? How do they hold staff meetings? That didn't speak to what we were looking to, so we wanted to make sure it was very specific to the IT innovation, and so that's why we went with that.
I understand that in your methods. However, in your findings, was there some piece that turned out to be different and specific to IT? I'm just wondering, what is the added value piece that you found by focusing on IT? That is there anything that looked different than just generic leadership competencies?
The only way I can answer that to say anything is that the specific question to the panel was, if you're implementing an IT innovation, what would this look like, or what would a novice have? So the question was actually stemmed with the IT innovation wording in it. That would be the only thing I can say. I haven't sat down and said, here's a tool of somebody's that says, this is what a communicator looks like, expert, novice. I haven't done that.
So you asked those questions, but your sort of bottom line finding would be they're really just general leadership competencies, the same ones.
The competencies are, yes.
For other types of
Right.
change and challenges.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, the core competencies are the same, yes.
Okay, great. And, this is a very nice presentation, and I love how you grounded it in these models. I think as you go to an external audience beyond your defense, I hope that you'll work with your faculty mentors to develop more robust methods,
Okay.
That would proactively address questions like the one Mark Wilson raised, describe your sample.
Okay.
I think that will be very helpful too as you go to external audiences.
Okay.
I know your committee has read your dissertation in detail, and so they're intimately familiar with all those details. But just a suggestion as you disseminate this.
All right. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate it.
Do I get a shot?
Hmm?
Do I get a shot?
Go for it.
All right, Bob.
Kevin is great.
Second round.
No, really, really great project. Having the expert panel of all of the 3 different groups, I think is really very helpful to really span a lot of different people and get a whole lot of different ideas. So I think it's great. So you come out with this competency tool, as you were talking about. I want you to kind of forget about your dissertation and think about utilizing this tool. You've got this great tool. You've got some great data showing that there's a lot of consensus there. You've obviously got the face validity. You've got the content validity with all of the experts coming from lots of different areas. Getting kind of back to Jean-Wen's question about criterion validity. Again, don't think of it as you in this your own hospital setting, but it's like you have this tool to potentially really make it widely disseminated and people utilizing this to increase that 50% success rate. What would be a little, I don't know, experiment or something to kind of do the predictive side, the criterion validity for this tool to really say, yeah, it is effective. Just brainstorm some ideas for me.
First thing that comes to mind is just actually doing a pilot.
Okay.
And going out to a different organization and say, you got an IT innovation coming up. What does it look like? And then working with the leadership and say, propose that we give this tool, see how it works. Then after the tool is submitted, we score the individuals and sit down with the supervisors of those individuals and say, does this get close? What do you think? Build a education, some kind of improvement plan, and then come back after the rollout and success and go back to the individuals and say, how did what we did, what we scored, what we measured, what we improved upon, how did that affect? And so is there a cause and effect? Out of that, did we actually impede or impact? Or did we help? And was it worthwhile? Do that, and then start also at the same time. There's another way of doing it is going back to what Jean-Wen was actually talking about, is saying, are there other tools that come close? And then start putting those tools together and saying, you do this tool, now take this one, and go through and see how they scored and see if there's some kind of, I don't know, is there some kind of justification between the two? Is there a line that you can draw between the two and say, this one has relevance and this one does too? And see if the questions are similar, see if the outcomes from those, so you can do the two. So my preference would actually be the pilot. I think that would have the biggest bang. Do that small, do a couple of them, and then start comparing them and see what was the outcome. Did one predictor do better than the others? Did one not produce? Was one really not as important as the other? And then start stratifying. Is leadership more important, and then negotiation? Which one is more important?
Great. I think, just to follow up, do you think, and I think that's a great strategy, if you had 50 hospitals, for example, and then you were able to do your pilot, or 25, I don't know, would you want failures? Would you want some of those?
Oh, most definitely.
Okay. And why would you want?
I'd say for the same thing we had in here, were the ones that didn't make it. I want to explore and understand why it didn't make it. Why did I word the question inappropriately? Was the predictor not useful? Was there something going on? Was there a systems issue in the hospital? Was, you ask something to a for-profit hospital versus an HMO, they're going to have different philosophies. So all of those pieces we'd have to look at and see why did it fail.
Great.
Well, what more to answer the question?
I know.
I know, he's over here.
Yeah. Like, really, Shelley? You're going to give them the answer? Thank you, Kevin.
Noonie.
Anything else? All right, I'm going,
Did you have something, Annie?
Annie, anything else? Do we have any online?
No, but I see another hand raised on the video.
All right.
Can I ask a question?
Hi, Kristen. He
Hey.
was hoping you wouldn't ask him anything.
So I have actually, I have a couple questions. So the first is, I think an easy one, and I think I might have missed this in your description of the method. So this is like you just telling me what you did. So building off of I think John Wen's question, when you talk about that process of matching those second round indicators to the concept model, how did that matching happen? Did you make those decisions? Did somebody else make those decisions?
I will say I made the final decision. I went back to several individuals within the expert panel and said, this is what this model is saying, this is the criteria. You have just completed the second round, this is what the group has seen, you've already seen the results. Are you in agreement that these do match or they do not match? And so they were the first ones, and then I came back. They actually agreed on all of them except for one, and then the final one, and again, it's the negotiation one. It's the one that was the hardest because in their concept model, it's so vague, it was hard to understand what that was.
So that was actually so the process was you went back to the experts and basically gave them a dichotomous, like, does this match or does this not match, rather than asking them to do the matching.
Correct. I just asked them, does this match, and they said yes or no. They all said yes. We had lots of discussion on the last one, the climate versus negotiation.
So I'm super excited about, I mean, I knew a little bit about Delphi, but I feel like I've learned a lot more in your presentation, and my barometer of a good presentation is if it gives me good ideas. So I'm excited about this. Could you go back to the experts and ask them to do the matching? Would that be feasible?
I could. I only asked a few, 6 or 7. I have to count them up to make sure. So I can go back to the rest of them and actually do that.
Okay, thank you.
I will say the expert panel I had, the 25 that finished it, are very engaged. Very much want this tool. There are CIOs that have been asking for this. My own CIO is like dying for this data in so I can get this tool, and I'm like, wait. It's just a piece of paper right now.
So my second question, I think, might build off of Bob's. I'm not totally sure, but in your concept model, again, if you look at that implementation climate or the negotiation box, I'm assuming, I could be assuming incorrectly, this isn't my field, but I'm assuming there's probably a lot of research on other factors that influence implementation climate or what you're calling negotiation. Would there be any way to look at, I mean, how much of the variability is due to the acute nurse manager's behavior or the middle manager's behavior, and how much is due to other climate factors that may or may not be within their control or something that they can respond to?
Yeah. Personally, I'm going to say there's a lot, and that's why I just stuck to the paper that the 3 individuals, the authors, came out and what they used. I just stuck, I played their verbatim words, their verbiage, and so we just went with that. I didn't want to put more into this. That would be, that's part of the whole validation that would go on later with the tool.
Okay, I have a question. I know, sorry, but it's really more for a conversation outside of the dissertation defense, I think, but I'll ask it just in case. So what comes to my mind when I see the competencies listed are other companies like Korn Ferry and other consulting firms that have created very robust competency definitions that are used in organizations. And so I'm curious, have you thought about how you might utilize some of that or tie in with what's already out there for supporting competency development that matches your model?
I did look at several different competency models, trying to figure out how to match these through. Basic answer is, for this dissertation, I went with just their verbiage and the panel. Where Barb's already started it, how I would change this whole model would be very different because of what other people are doing. Other competency models more are dynamic, where this is, I'm sorry, it's very horizontal, and I don't agree with it. But for this particular, this is what it spoke to, this is what it needs to be, that's what I went with.
Okay, great. Makes sense.
All right, any other questions? I'm going to then, excuse the audience, and Carrie, if you'll excuse our external people, and we'll stay online, Annie.
Yep.
We'll have a discussion. Thank you all for coming.